What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Dan, and this is Stout Gaming. So today we're going to change it up a little bit. I've been posting a lot of Pokemon VGC Draft League content recently, but I've come to realize there's not a lot of good information on how to get better at drafting in VGC. So today I'm going to be posting a very basic breakdown of my thought process going into most VGC drafts, how I team build for VGC, and what goes into coming out of a VGC draft with a team that you really feel like you can build around. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. But first, I want to give a special thanks to some people that I asked about and got some background on for this video. All three of these gentlemen are fantastic drafters with a long draft league history that goes back even farther than mine. So special thanks to Matt Alsina, Izzy Max, and Ryan, aka Piano Guy 27. I will link all of their YouTube channels in the description below. So the first thing I look at when I am starting with a draft is I need to make sure that my types are fairly balanced. There's going to be a lot of information on the screen, but I'm going to do my best to break it down for you. So 3 type cores are really important when it comes to VGC draft. Why? Because you want to be able to have switch-ins for attacks that go into a slot so that you can mitigate damage at some point in time, and these will also give you a variety of different ways that you can cover damage output. The 2 that I try to get in every single draft are in the middle, the Fire, Water, Grass core and the Dragon, Steel, Fairy, otherwise known as the Fantasy core. Every single draft I do, I will make sure to have at least one of each of those 6 types. Now the other 2 cores, the Dark, Fighting, Psychic and the Electric, Ground, Flying, are also really nice if you can get them, but in my mind they're a bit less essential. But if you go with a Dark, Fighting, Psychic, Electric, Ground, Flying type, but you don't have all 6 of the Fire, Water, Grass and Fantasy core, then that's probably fine as well. These are really rather broad ideas when it comes to drafting. You want to make sure you have some type differential, and there's a really good way to explain why. So let's take a look at some of these type cores that we have laid out in front of us. On this far left, you see we've got an Azumarill, Corviknight, and Garchomp. So that's a pretty standard fantasy core. You've got the Fairy type, the Azumarill, the Steel type, the Corviknight, and the Ground type, the Garchomp. They cover each other's weaknesses really well. Something that hits super effective into one, another one can be a pretty solid switch-in. For example, Garchomp, weak to Dragon and Ice as 2 types that it's weak to. The Azumarill is a really good switch-in for those attacks because Azumarill completely negates Dragon attacks and resists Ice. The Azumarill is weak to Electric types attacks. Garchomp is a good switch-in for the Azumarill. The Azumarill is also weak to Grass type attacks if you're not running Sap Sipper on it. And there's where you get a good Corviknight switch in. Now Corviknight, weak to Fire and Electric. You can either switch in the Garchomp for both or the Azumarill for one of those respectively. It's a really good defensive synergy, so this is why I sort of try and target that kind of type core. We've also got the Fire, Water, Grass core next to it with a Heatran, Blastoise, and Tapu Bulu. It's a really similar thing. The Heatran doesn't like eating ground type attacks or water type attacks. The Tapu Bulu is a great switch-in for those. The Bulu's not a fan of fire type attacks. You got the Blastoise. The Blastoise really doesn't want to eat a grass type attack. You got the Heatran, and it goes the other way as well. But the predefined cores aren't the only way to do that type of type synergy. For example, at the far right, you see a Gastrodon and a Celesteela. Those 2 together don't make up any 3-type core. In fact, it's only 2 Pokemon, even though you can make up 3-type cores with just 2 Pokemon. But if you think about the weaknesses, what's Gastrodon weak to? Well, only grass types really. Celesteela quad resists grass. What's Celesteela weak to? You got Fire and Electric. Gastrodon is a really good switch in there. So the 3-type cores are really just synergistic ideas for how to have things on your team that are good switch-ins and also cover good things offensively. But as you can see with the far right option, they're not the end-all be-all when it comes to having synergistic types. The synergy between your types is really, really important, and that's why I use 3-type cores as a guideline, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Next, speed matters. Of course, you want high stats for a lot of things, but your speed stat is going to be your most important stat that you look at in VGC. It doesn't matter if you've got the best attack stats, the best defense stats, the best HP stats. If your speed stats are bad, you're going to be much easier to build against. So if you look at the far left and far right teams, you'll have two different things. Both of them look pretty solid on the surface. You've got Rillaboom, Cresselia, and Suicune on the left, and Tapu Koko, Goodra, and Torkoal on the right. Now, on the left, all three have base speed of 85. Why is this bad? Because if your opponent wants to try to underspeed you for Trick Room or outspeed you with a faster mode, they just have that one speed to beat. So in that case, it's really easy to win the speed advantage against a team whose speeds are tightly knit like that. Now, you're not going to face a team where all 11 Pokemon that they draft are going to be the exact same speed, or at least I sincerely hope you don't. But even if you throw in something like a Landorus Therian has a base speed of 81 there, maybe you get some base speed 60s in there, but everything that's tightly bunched in the middle, you're going to have a hard time winning a speed advantage because your opponent is going to be able to build for the speeds that you have specifically. That's why having speeds like the one on the right, where you've got the 130, you've got the 80, you've got the 20, is going to end up a lot better for you when it comes to draft in the long run. Because it's really hard to build something that outspeeds Goodra and also outspeeds Tapu Koko without Goodra coming in with a really solid underspeed in that tier. Because you don't know, if you want to outspeed the Goodra, you have to decide, do I want to invest even more speed into my team to also outspeed the Tapu Koko? What if he just runs a bulky Goodra? The difference in speeds makes it a lot harder for your opponent to build for you. Now, obviously, you're going to have more than 3 Pokemon on your draft team. But imagine if you have a 130, a 110, a 100, a 90, an 80, a 70, a 60, all the way down to about a 30 or even a 20 with this Torkoal. Your opponent's going to have a really hard time choosing what they actually want to outspeed, how much speed to invest, and that's where you're going to be able to get an advantage. So speed tiers are really important in VGC draft, and it doesn't just mean draft everything that's fast. It means draft things in differing slots, so it's a lot easier to hit a lot of different speed calcs when you are getting ready for a draft match, so it's harder for your opponent to build against you. Speed control, in that same vein, is really important. So the main ways that you look at speed control are Trick Room, Tailwind, and then lowering speed with a Electroweb or an Icy Wind. A Max Airstream would also count as something that raises your own speed, or a Max Strike to lower your opponent's speed. But they're a bit less consistent because they do require the max. So with that being said, why is speed control important? Well, if you think back to the previous slide, if you know that your opponent's Pokemon are all faster than all of your Pokemon, well, you use Trick Room, you go first, your team is often a lot bulkier, and you're gonna roll through it. So having a Trick Room setter on most teams is gonna be important, because you're always gonna face a team that's faster than you that you're gonna want to underspeed. Now, why is Tailwind important then? Well, maybe you want to outspeed that team if you've got some middle speed Pokemon and they've got some much faster ones. So that's why something like Tailwind that lets you outspeed your opponent is also pretty important. Now, having access to both Trick Room and Tailwind means your opponent has to prep to find a way to beat both, especially if you are following the rule about making sure that your speed tiers are pretty well differentiated. So that's why Tailwind is important. Now, slightly less important are the Icy Winds and the Electrowebs of the world, but there are ways to adjust speed in-game, especially with dynamic speed calculations. Speed in-game adjustments are going to be pretty important in the long run, and you want to be aware if your opponent has them, even if you yourself don't have them. But I would try to get at least 2 of these 3 options on any team that you draft. Now, threat cores. Why is this important? Well, you want to win the game. What wins the game? Dealing damage. What deals damage? Things that work together synergistically. Dragapult Colossal. Anyone who's played VGC in the last year knows. Dragapult uses Surf, Colossal goes to +6 speed, +2 attack and special attack, and starts going to town with max Volcalith. That's going to do a lot of damage. Ninetales Venusaur. You set the sun, the Venusaur maxes. It's going to do a lot of damage. Tapu Koko Thievul. You've got a terrain. You've got something that has Unburden and can use a seed. The Thievel's not going to deal a lot of damage, but it's going to really support the Coco, which can do a lot of damage. Or even something in the far right, where you get combinations, where you could have an Unburden Hawlucha with a Tapu Fini, or you could have a Weakness Policy Hawlucha with a Glaceon, and Hawlucha has that Unburden as well. That's going to deal a lot of damage, and your opponent has to prep for ways to beat both of them. So, as you're starting out with VGC drafts, I'd try to build your draft around something that you know is really going to be threatening, whether it's weakness policy, whether it's a really solid weather mode, whether it's a really solid terrain mode, something that you know is going to beat your opponent. Something that combines with the previous slide is if you get something like Tornadus and Metagross, you set Tailwind, then you Brutal Swing, so you're faster, and you've got a Metagross that is now at +2. That's the type of thing I'm saying with threat cores. You want to make sure that you've got a really solid base plan for your game. Now, on top of threat cores, you want to look at what are your support options. There are tons of different types of support, and a lot of these really overlap. But we're going to look at just some of the very, very most basic types. You've got Redirection, you've got Follow Me, and Rage Powder. So that means you can have something next to it that is not threatened by your opponent's attacks. Redirection is really important in draft because there are really limited redirectors, especially if you are drafting in VGC Series 9 rules, which is what we are drafting in currently with most VGC draft leagues. Fake Out, a lot more common than Redirection, but it guarantees you a flinch, and this way you've got another thing next to it that is pretty free for a turn. It's a form of offense and it's a form of defense. Taunt. Lots of things can use Taunt, but Taunt is also really important. One, because it can force your opponent to run a Mental Herb if they don't want to get taunted, and two, because it forces your opponent into attacking moves and stops them from using a lot of these support options, which if you can stop your opponent from using support, that's a form of support in itself. Intimidate as an ability. Lowering your opponent's stats, always going to be really strong. Intimidate, lowering attack is going to be great. Screens, raising your own defenses, it's going to be awesome. Your Pokemon become inherently more bulky. They're going to survive more. So that's a great form of support, making sure that your Pokemon survive more to deal more damage in the long run. Snarl, same basic concept. You're lowering your opponent's special attack. So when your opponent's special attack is lower, you survive more, you deal more damage. Statusing your opponent, you either make them slower with a paralysis, you make them deal less damage with a burn. Those are really great support options. And then lastly, Imprison. This shuts down a lot of things that your opponent wants to do. It's not something that I think you need to have on every team, but it's something to keep in mind. This Chandelure, for example, with Imprison can have Trick Room on its set, and then it stops your opponent from going Trick Room. And then if they were trying to go slower than you, yeah, they're just slower than you because now you're faster than them because they don't get their Trick Room up. So having solid support options in draft is also something that I consider really important. If your team is all threats and no support, yeah, you're going to look scary on paper, but your opponent's going to be able to deal with it a lot easier than a team that's balanced between really good threats, a really strong threat core, and then the support options that properly, well, support it. Next, you've got to decide what kind of style you're drafting. I've sort of broken down 5 basic styles here. You've got setup offense, where, for example, you've got that redirection in the NDDF. You've got that Moltres that everyone's seen use Nasty Plot on the ladder next to the NDDF. You can't get faked out because the psychic terrain is up. You spend a turn, you get stronger, then you max, and then you just sweep through the team. That's a really good form of setup offense. You've got your bulky offense options. You've got the Crocodile with the Intimidate. It lowers the opponent's attack. And it's got a lot of natural bulk. You've got the Primarina, really specially bulky, not incredibly fast, goes slow a lot of the time, but hits really hard, especially with that spread Hyper Voice if you've got the Liquid Voice ability. You've got your Hyper Offense, Cinderace, really frail. It's going to max when you see it most of the time. But when it maxes, it's going to use that Libero ability, get a lot of stab attacks going, and that's going to deal a lot of damage. Maybe pair it with something like Noivern that can set Tailwind to allow it to outspeed the entire format instead of just 85% of the format. The Noivern itself is a max threat, but it's also really frail, so that's sort of the hyper offense. You got something that's a bit more balanced. You're not super slow, you're not super fast, but you've got sort of the good support in Incineroar, which covers a lot of different support options. It's got Fake Out, it's got Taunt, it's got Will-O-Wisp, it's got Snarl. It can do a lot for you support-wise. Next to, say, a Metagross, which isn't going to be the fastest thing in the world. It's probably going to take some hits. It's pretty bulky, and it's going to be able to do a lot for you without having to devote yourself completely to offense. Then you've got Stall. This is a lot harder to do in VGC draft because you will only have 10 to 12 Pokemon depending on your draft league's rules, and your opponent's going to see the stall options on your team, and they're going to try and find a way to beat it, because if you see Chansey Shuckle, you're going to have a way to beat Chansey Shuckle. It's not like on the ladder where you set it up and your opponent probably doesn't have something devoted specifically to it. If they see that it's on your draft team and you're going to be playing it in the coming weeks, then Chansey Shuckle is something that they are definitely going to go in and do their best to try to beat. Versatility of your Mons. Now, this is something that I think it's really underrated, but is also going to be really, really important. On the left, you've got a set of Mons that I think are really versatile. On the right, you've got a set of Mons that I think are much less versatile. And overall, they're probably comparable in power and consideration. But we're going to go through these one at a time and discuss why the versatile Mons with the potential to fill multiple roles on your team instead of just the one they are most known for, versus the not so versatile ones, and why that might make the versatile ones better on your team. So let's look at Tapu Koko. Yeah, everyone knows. It's fast, offensive special attacker. It can deal some spread damage, right? But it can also set screens very well. It can also serve as an unburden proc for something with Electric Seed. It's got access to Eerie Impulse to drop opposing special attack. It's got physical sets. Tapu Koko, if you draft it, you can run 10 to 13 moves on it in a season pretty consistently. And that's the type of versatility that's really hard for your opponent to prep for. I'm a big Tapu Koko fan in draft. Anyone in the last 2 leagues that I've been in can attest that I use Tapu Koko pretty regularly and with decent success as well. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got something like Cinderace. Yeah, you can run a court change set, but it's going to be worse than its offensive sets, and its offensive sets are really, really good. It's going to deal a lot of damage and be really fast compared to a lot of the format. But with that being said, it's not going to do as many different things, which in my mind is why Tapu Koko is going to be better in Draft League generally. Because Cinderace, you're going to run 5 or 6 moves on the season, maybe 7 if you want to splash a special set every once in a while. Whereas with Tapu Koko, you're running a lot more different moves, so your opponent's got a lot more to prep for. Versatility is really about making sure your opponent has a difficult time preparing for something. Thundurus Incarnate, great option because you can run the Defiant set to have a really offensive set that you see a lot on the ladders. But don't forget, this thing is a really good prankster bot as well that can run things like Substitute, Thunderwave, Eerie Impulse. So it's got a lot of different options that your opponent has to be ready for. Amoonguss. Yeah, I guess you could run a Choice Band Amoonguss, but it's going to run Spore and Rage Powder. Now, it's really, really good at running Spore and Rage Powder and worth consideration for your team, but if you draft it, you know that that's all that it's doing. Gardevoir, powerful special attacker, you can set specs with it. But you can also proc a weakness policy with Shadow Sneak. You can set Trick Room with it. It's got a lot of options again. Salazzle. It's fast. It hits hard on the special side. It's frail. It has Fake Out. That's basically it. Nidoqueen, you've got your physical sets, you've got your special sets, you've got a massive, massive move pool. It's going to be pretty versatile. You're going to be able to fit it onto a lot of different comps and do a lot of things with it if you're comfortable understanding what it can do and how you want to use it. Nihilego, it's a powerful special attacker. It doesn't really do much besides that. Volcarona, you've got your offensive sets. You've got the pretty obvious Quiver Dance set. You've got the spread attacks and Heat Wave. You've got Bug Buzz. You're probably running Protect on a set like that. But you've also got the Rage Powder sets. You can run something that burns your opponents. Like Volcarona has a lot more options. So while in Tier 1, if it's Tier 1 in a lot of leagues, it might not be the best attacker or the best redirector, but you don't know if it's going to be an attacker or a redirector or some kind of combo piece. It is very versatile. Unlike Gorgeist over here, which is a bulky Trick Room setter that does some physical offense. It doesn't really do too much besides that, so it's not going to be the best here. And then if you look at the low tiers, there are low tier versatility as well. Rotom Fan. It's discount Zapdos because you can max it, you can Airstream, you can max Lightning with it. It's going to do a lot of damage. You can also run a bulky set that has something like Will-O-Wisp. You can run Ally Switch on it. You can run some screens on it. Rotom Fan, a lot of different options. Rhyperior comes out in Trick Room, it hits hard, it redirects electric attacks. That's basically it. So versatility is something that you want to consider when it comes to your VGC draft, because if you have a team of 11 different Mons, say if you're drafting 11 in your season, and they all can only do one thing, or they can do multiple things but only one thing really well, then your opponent's going to have a lot easier time than if you've got a team that's got, 5 or 6 highly versatile Mons that can fit a lot of different situations. That becomes a lot harder to prep for. Then you're prepping for 15 or 16 different options as opposed to 10 or 11 different options. Lastly, your plan in draft. As you can see, SpongeBob has your ideal draft, and reality just sets that thing on fire. If you've got your plan, you've written out the 11 Mons you want to draft in the tiers, you know exactly how you want to do it, burn it. It could happen, but it's probably not going to happen. Or if it does happen, there's probably a good chance that you're drafting things that are weaker than average in that tier that allows you to have that kind of plan. But each pick, you want to have backup options. You want to understand exactly why you're picking what you're picking. Say round 5 or 6 rolls around, and you're really looking at Jellicent. And then Jellicent gets picked 2 picks before you, and now you're panicking. You don't know what to do. Now, why did you want the Jellicent? Are you completing a Fire, Water, Grass core? In that case, maybe something like a Azumarill is going to be really strong for you, because it's a bulky water type that can deal a decent chunk of damage. Were you looking for a Trick Room setter? Well, if you're looking for a Trick Room setter, maybe Musharna's the right choice for you. It's going to be another pretty bulky Trick Room setter that fills a similar role to the Jellicent. Maybe you wanted a bulky water that sets Trick Room. Even then, you've got things like Slowbro and Slowking. So your draft does not implode just because someone picked the thing you want. Have a lot of different options. Consider them. Figure out why it is you want what you want, and then have options for it. So if you do get sniped, it's not really a snipe because you know exactly what you're going for. Now, here's the hardest thing to understand that I'm going to go over today. Relative value changes throughout the draft. If you got your ideal draft, yeah, you can start picking through it, but after round 1, relative value is going to start changing. Say there's a run on bulky steel types. Then steel types become a lot more valuable, and maybe you consider picking a steel type before all the good steel types are gone, even if you didn't really have a steel type in your plan. That could be something that you are thinking about at that point in time. Maybe you picked first and your league allows you to have 2 tier 1s, for example. And then there's a massive run on tier 1s and almost everyone has picked 2 of them by the time it gets back to you. Maybe you know that there's only going to be 3 more picked and you're okay with 4 options. So you can skip the tier 1 and pick the best thing you see in tier 2. Because if you pick the best thing you see in tier 2, it's relatively more valuable than the thing in tier 1 you can get 4 rounds later because no one else has tier 1s left to pick. So analyzing what you think the relative value of the draft is going to be really important for you when it comes to drafting a successful team. Now you also want to build around what you have, not what you wish you had. So if you think, oh, if I had drafted this, then Pokemon X, Y, and Z would all be really good. Right? But you didn't draft Pokemon A, that would have made it really good. You've drafted Pokemon B, which fills maybe the same roles as Pokemon X, Y, and Z. So you need to adjust your plan based on what it is you end up drafting. If I draft Tapu Koko in the first few rounds because I love Tapu Koko, I'm not going to draft Jolteon later because they fill almost exactly the same role. Jolteon just does it worse. Even though I'm really high on Jolteon as well. They just don't fit together. However, if someone else drafts Tapu Koko and I get something like Tapu Lele, Jolteon's going to be on my list because even though I may have wanted Tapu Koko, I don't have it. So I'm going to take Jolteon instead to fill a similar role. And you want to make sure you have answers for the most common archetypes. I'm talking Trick Room, I'm talking Tailwind, that bulky offense, that hyper offense. Anything I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you've got the answers for that archetype. You want to make sure you have the tools in your toolbox to deal with it if you match up against it any given week. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I don't know if this will be a standalone video or the first video of many, but I just wanted to give some basics on good draft strategy so you can go into your next Pokemon VGC draft with a plan. But like I said, my name is Dan, this is Stout Gaming. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know below what you thought I said that was right. Let me know below what you thought I said that was stupid. But thank you guys again for tuning in. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.